What's up everybody, hope you're having a great day so far. I've been asked a lot now that the new format's finally here, which hand traps do I think are good this format. Had a long discussion on stream about this and decided to turn it into a little bit of a short tier list video on hand traps. Keep in mind, this might change as the format evolves. For now, we're expecting mainly branded Despia, Sword Soul, a little bit of Flunder, a little bit of Adventure, maybe some Eldritch here and there. Those kinds of decks, so that's what I rated these hand traps based on. This was recorded live on stream, so if you want to join the discussion next time, links are going to be in the description below. But without further ado, enjoy the discussion. I hope it's helpful for you guys, and yeah, enjoy. I did promise you guys to make a hand trap tier list today for the upcoming format. Let's do that real quick. This is also, you know, you're here the first time I'm actually recording like a YouTube video on stream. It's the first time, so be honored. You're here. You're here. Say hello to YouTube. We're here. We're doing a hand trap tier list now. Okay. So the point of this entire thing, some of you were here yesterday. I wanted to talk about, you know, which hand traps are gonna be good this format and which aren't. I'm just gonna sort them into some tiers. And so we already did some preparation for this yesterday. It was like a 2 or 3 hour discussion or something. And because I wanted the YouTube video to be a little bit shorter, you know, I decided to do the YouTube video today where I just talk a little bit about which hand traps are good and which ones aren't. So the tiers are Ash tier, which is the best one. Hand traps that you can easily main deck for specific reasons. Then there's some hand traps that I think you can only side deck because they're not good in enough matchups. Some that are like more experimental, and some that I think are just like pretty much unplayable. So that's the tiers. Ash obviously goes into the Ash tier, and I think it's the only card that goes into this tier because Ash is by far the best hand trap this format. It is not even close. Ash is good against every deck, and it's insane against Despia, right? It's insane against Despia. It's the only hand trap that I feel like if you open that card against Despia, it's like legit probably enough most of the times to stop them from playing. Even if they have a way to play around it with like branded in red, the opening that they do will never compare to what they would usually do. So Ash is insane, especially because it's also just like good in every matchup. But I don't think we need to talk much about Ash. Let's talk about some of the good stuff things first. I think main deckable, we can definitely throw Ash and we can throw Valor and Impermanence because both of them are solid against Despia. They have like pros and cons. Like for example, if people draw phase opening, you can't Valor the Aluber. But besides that, it's a pretty solid card. Imperm obviously works on the Aluber and draw phase, which is why Imperm is a little bit better. So I guess I put Imperm before Valor. Simply because Imperm is always good. Also, Imperm is good as a 6th card, which Valor is not. There's some merit to playing Valor if you play Halka Fibrax, right? You can like use Valor as an actual tuner and spellcaster to go Halk Selene Axis Code. That is a little advantage of Valor, but honestly, most decks that play hand traps usually want both anyways, so both of them are pretty solid though. Also, quick side note, against Despia, always Valor or Imperm the Aluber if you can. The reason is, if they have Branded Fusion already, you could technically wait for Lubellion or Albion, but the thing is, if they have Branded Fusion already, most of the time they search Branded Loss, so you can't Valor them anyways. And if they don't have Branded Fusion, you obviously want to Valor or Imperm the Aluber. So always Valor or Imperm the Aluber. Don't wait for Lubellion, because they have lost if they have Branded Fusion already. Next up, I think two that belong together that are both main deckable is Bell and Crow. I haven't really... to me, it feels like Crow is the better one against Despia, right? One of the best hands. It might even be better than Imperm or Valor against Despia. Definitely not as good as Ash, but it's decent, right? Very decent. And the issue with Crow is if it's your only hand trap, they can often search a Mercurier to counter it. And Crow in other matchups, I feel like you need to get a little bit lucky to have a good spot for it. Like there's no doubt that there are some spots against Tenny Sword Soul, for example. Like you can hit a Tenny out of the graveyard. You can like banish the target for Baxia if they go for a Baxia play. It's okay, it's just there's no guarantee that their opening involves anything that you can crow. But the card is alright. Bell, on the other hand, is like kind of in the same boat, but has like some more applications. Like, for example, you can Bell Water Enchantress when it tries to grab Rite of Aramesir, which you cannot crow that, of course. So against adventure decks, Bell has some advantages. Downside against Despia is definitely Crow is better against Branded Lost. Once again, Branded Lost being a huge issue for some of these hand traps. So that's why I think Crow might be slightly better here. Also has some advantages against Eldritch, where Bell is not that good. But they're both main deckable, I think. I'm not sure if you want to go for both in any deck, depends on how much slots you have for hand traps, but you'd probably go with like Ash, Veil, or Imperm in one of these, even if you have room for like 12 hand traps, so that's something. While I was talking about Imperm and Veiler, let's also quickly talk about Mourner. I put Mourner in the main deck category, but note that I put it to the very back. There's a lot of issues with Mourner, but it's technically comparable to Imperm and Veiler. It's not as good, I think, because it's just a little more situational. But if you're playing like a 60 card adventure deck that wants to play 20 or more hand traps, I think the card is playable. But it's like at the very bottom of the barrel for main deckable. Yeah, it's like it's hard once per turn, which both of these aren't. But it does have some advantage. Like, for example, it can hit an Aluber that comes off Branded Opening in the draw phase, which Veiler cannot. But then it cannot hit an Aluber that's normal summoned, which Veiler can, right? So there's that. Let's talk about a card that has been very popular pre-Despia, but I don't think is going to be any good going forward, is Ghost Ogre. I'm actually going to put Ghost Ogre in the no way category. I don't think you play this card for two simple reasons. Main deck, it has almost no application against Despia, almost none, pretty much non-existent. And in the side deck category, I don't think it goes there because if you're siding specifically for a matchup, I think you're always going to have better options than Ghost Ogre right now. Like, you can't main deck it, there's no way. It's not good against Despia, it's not good against Eldritch. It's like okay against Adventure Piles, but if you want to hand trap against Adventure Piles, play something else, I think. You know. Mourner, what are you trying to hit with it? I mean, you can hit Lubellion or Albion if they don't have Lost, and it can be okay. You can hit Aluber if it comes off opening. There is some spots for it, but yeah, it's not as good as Imperm or Veiler. That's why it's at the back. It's only main deckable if you, like I said, if you play like a very big 60 card deck that wants a lot of hand traps, then it's okay. Which one makes sense to talk about next? I suppose Gamma is like a card that, if you're going second, it's pretty much as good as Ash, I'd say, except for against Despia, right? But it's a very good card going second. It depends on your deck, right? There's some decks that want to main deck this card, but there's going to be a lot of decks that want to side deck this for when they go second. If you have a deck that can trigger this reliably when going first to like negate an Ash Blossom, right, then you could consider maining it. But I probably throw this at the very top of the side deck category, just because it's going to be very strong in a lot of matchups going second. Like, it doesn't really matter which deck. If it's not Eldritch, you would side Gamma. Pretty much. And while we talk about Gamma, let's talk about two things that I'm going to throw in the experimental category, and those are the other two Psyframes. You probably, I don't know how many even know what these do, but these are Delta and Epsilon, and Delta is the one that negates spell cards, and Epsilon is the one that negates trap cards. Delta, I think, has some usage. If you go second against Branded, you just have more copies of a card that can negate Branded Fusion. I think that is okay. I think that you can experiment with this and it could be okay in your side deck because if you have Ash and Epsilon, Delta in a 60 card, in a 40 card deck, you're like super likely to be able to negate Branded Fusion. The only disadvantage is that this can be outed by Branded Lost. That's a little bit of a disadvantage, but on the other hand, it can't get Cold Bite, and they probably also won't have it for Crossout Designator. So it's a good experimental side deck, especially if you already have Gamma in your side deck, right? You might as well maybe throw these in as well. Just an idea, you know, that's why the experimental category is here. You might end up liking it, you might end up disliking it, that's up to you. Delta, on the other hand, is something... No, this is Epsilon. Epsilon is the one that I considered for Despia players when they want an answer to Anti-Spell or D-Barrier, right? Against anti-spell, this will almost always work, because people always flip anti-spell in the draw phase, so you can Epsilon it, and that's very powerful. Against D-Barrier, you obviously have to find a way to force them to D-Barrier before you Epsilon, before you put any monster on the board. So it can work if you hard open Branded Fusion, it can work if you start with like Patchwork into Poly and then activate Poly, maybe they'll chain D-Barrier and you can then Epsilon it. It's just insane because it gives you bodies for Poly as well to go Chimera. It's an interesting idea. I have not personally tested it, that's why it's going in the experimental category, but I do think a lot of people, when they play Despia, are very afraid of, you know, the floodgates and the D-Barriers. So, you know, consider this card when you're building your side deck. Definitely not main deckable though, of course. Another big one I think that a lot of people talk about is Nib, and Nib is somewhere between side deckable and main deckable. It really depends how good you think this card is against Despia, and honestly, I think it really depends. It depends how much people are actually, how many people are playing Nib in their main deck, and how many people play around Nib, right? If no one mains Nib because it's supposedly bad against Despia, then people won't play around it and commit to lines that play into it, and then it suddenly becomes main deckable, I think. Like, quality-wise, around, like, here. If people play around it, though, when using Despia, it's a side deck card and should only be here for, like, matchups like Sword Soul, matchups like Salamangreat, even. I don't know. It really, Nibiru, I think, throughout this format is gonna shift back and forth between, like, being main deckable and being a side deck card only. Yeah, do with that what you will. It is either here or here. Token Collector is a side deck card because simply doesn't do anything against Despia. I don't think I have to explain this. It's a very good side deck card though if your deck wants to respect Sword Soul. It has an additional application in adventure matchups if you want to do that. I mean, it trades 1-for-1 with like the adventure package for like for whatever that's worth, right? And puts a body onto your board. It's okay. A card that I thought a lot about that I think is between unplayable and not playable is Cherries. We toyed around with this yesterday for a bit. We tried making this viable against Despia, but we simply couldn't find a way to banish anything that really hurts them. Like, you banish Lubellion, they get out of their like recycling grind game and stuff, but their first turn is still gonna look pretty much the same because they just summon Albion instead and send Snow and still end on Mirror Jade and everything. It just takes a card out of your hand without really taking anything away from their board. So it's like, yeah, it's between experimental and unplayable. Yeah. If you take Lubellion, it doesn't really work. If you take Albion, they just summon Lubellion, shuffle one Albion back, same thing. It hurts them in the long run, but it doesn't hurt them like immediately. Their end board is still gonna be pretty much the same thing. If you hit Mirror Jade, it's technically okay, but they have a lot of outs. Like, you hit Mirror Jade in response to Branded Fusion or Lubellion or Albion. It can hurt them a little bit, but they just, like, they have routes around it, right? They go Lubellion, shuffle it into the deck. Also, they can chain Branded in red if they have an Albaz in the grave. Like, for example, you let them summon Albion, chain Cherries on Mirror Jade, they go chain Branded in red, add back Albaz, make a Mirror Jade, and it's just, like, super bad in that case, you know? Banishing Mirror Jade just like, sometimes it works, but they'll usually be able to shuffle it back in with the Lubellion, and then if they have a Poly, they can maybe immediately make it. I think thinking about this more, hitting Mirror Jade can work if they don't have like the answers to it. So try this card. I'm putting it into experimental. Try it if you want to hit it. If you want to put it in against Despia, then hit Mirror Jade. It's the only thing that even makes remote sense, I think, to me. Two more for the experimental category that we theoried yesterday that don't seem too bad, honestly, is Retaliating Sea and Contact Sea. Both of them against Despia have their applications. The ratio I would suggest is a 3 of Retaliating Sea and a 1 of Contact Sea. Because the way it works is you Retaliating Sea onto their Branded Fusion, and that's sometimes really annoying for them. It disables Albion because the stuff immediately gets banished, and it disables partly it disables Mirror Jade if they get to summon it, right? If they get to summon Mirror Jade, they can't send the fusion to the graveyard to activate the effect, so that's neat. One drawback of it is that if they open the Patchwork engine, they can pop the Retaliating Sea with Chimera on their first turn, right? Which you usually don't. You try to avoid this, right? Giving them something to Guardian Chimera on the first turn. But if you run one Contact Sea, you actually get that search off of the Retaliating Sea, which is not bad. So you still have like a full hand of 5 and can potentially Contact Sea them in an awkward spot, like, you know. So I think this engine is interesting. I'm not sure if it's going to be the best side deck option against Despia, but it's definitely something to consider going forward. Droll and Lockbird, I think in this format goes to the main deck category simply because of, I feel like, how popular this Allure, All-Out Gas, Patchwork, Despia version is. Because against that deck, there's a very good chance you can Droll them and it's gonna hurt a lot. The only issue with it is that a draw phase opening is really, really strong against Lockbird. But if they don't have opening, there's pretty much no way their deck plays around this. So there is some risk attached to it. But honestly, that's the same to every hand trap, right? It's the same with Veiler. If they draw phase opening, Veiler becomes awkward and stuff like that. So Droll is main deckable. Whether you think it's better than Crow and Bell, I'm not sure. I think it's like right about here. It's also decent in some other matchups. In some matchups it sucks, like Eldritch, of course, but it's decent against Sword Soul depending on their hand. If they open Emergence, it's pretty good. If they open Desires, it's pretty good. Like you block the Mohi and the Shishao Search, it's okay. Let's get some of these the bad ones out of the way. Lancia, I think, is a side deck card at max, but I honestly think there's way better ones in the side deck, so I'm putting Lancia in the no way category. I don't think it's very good at all. Chaos Hunter is something that I was gonna put in the experimental category yesterday against, like, you can really hit Branded Heart with this. If, like Despia, you can hit it really hard if they don't have Lost on the board. And they make Albion, you can Chaos Hunter, prevent the Albion, and then also they can't even have like a Branded in Red setup, because they can't banish for Branded in Red. But then I realized you just summon a monster that makes them able to go into Chimera, so I think that's just a no way for me. Even if you, and then also it doesn't work against Branded Lost, so like for multiple reasons I think this card is not good. No Material is just bad, I think. I mean, just like, it's not even, it's just an honorable mention, it shouldn't be here. Dimension Shifter is a side deck option for any deck that isn't Flunder. In Flunder, obviously, it's a main deck staple, but even in like side decks, I don't like this card. I feel like for most current decks, it doesn't do enough for you. Like, it doesn't stop like all the things that Sword Soul does, it doesn't stop all the things that Despia does. It's just kind of awkward, you know, it's just, this card is only good if your own deck benefits from the lingering effect on your next turn, like how Flunder benefits from it, right? And that's why for other decks, I'd put it between Experimental and No Way, but like, yeah. Between No Material and Dimension Shifter, it's just hand traps that are only good when you go second aren't that great. Like Shifter, you can use Shifter when you go first, but you lock yourself out, so it's like usually not good in most of the decks. Dogwood is not good. I mean, we thought about it yesterday, but I think the only application that this gives is freaking timeout, and you know, don't do this. Don't cite a freaking hand trap for timeout. Don't be that guy. Phantasme, one of my favorite hand traps, unfortunately can't be main decked ever in this format because Sword Soul and Despia just don't play into this. It can be a side deck if something like Salamandrate is super popular, which we've tried this on stream today, but I'm not sure if this is any good. So if there's decks that play into it, you could side it, but it's probably at the very end of side deckable hand traps. You could probably find something better. And then finally, Skullmeister. I mean, Skullmeister is probably like the same in one of the, is Skullmeister as bad as Ghost Ogre right now? It certainly has some applications. I think it has more spots than Ogre, but it's still not a very good card against Despia. Like, it's not super scary. Against Sword Soul, there's also, I mean, you can negate like a Tenny Engrave, but honestly, you'd always prefer Crow or Bell over this most of the time. And I mean, that's it. That's all the ones that I deemed relevant enough to mention. We've talked about some more, you know, don't be like, oh, where's the Gizmek hand trap? You know, we've talked about them yesterday on stream, and we came to the conclusion that they're not even worth mentioning. So if you want to main deck a bunch of hand traps, you know, go with these up top, maybe Nibiru, maybe Gamma if your deck allows it, and then stick with the rest in the side deck and experiment with some of these. I do think up until Skullmeister, all these 4 have decent potential when it comes to being experimental. These 3 I don't have the highest hopes for, but you know, they could be. But that's it for the short YouTube tier list. I don't actually know how short it was, but I hope this was insightful to you. I hope this helps when you try building your decks for the new upcoming format. You know, that's about it. I'm out, and check out the stream. Links are gonna be in the description below, and peace out.